Hello and welcome back to PredictIt Live, only on Old Bull TV, your exclusive source for real-time coverage of the stock market for politics. It is now the final countdown to the New York City mayoral primary set for June 22nd. Early voting is underway now, and a bunch of candidates are still in it. Polling is all over the place, and the ranked choice vote reporting methodology looks like an unholy mess. It's a good thing that today's expert panel specializes in just this kind of mess. So let's get to it. Apologies, I'm just getting my own voice in my ear a little bit there. I had a little bit of feedback. Anyway, welcome back, political traders. I am your host, Flip Pideaux, and if you are new to PredictIt, we are setting up our viewers with a free $25 in real, hard, cold trading cash. Just go to predictit.org/promo/oldbull25 to collect. If you're joining us live, please ask any questions that may occur to you in the YouTube chat window, and if you're catching us on the replay, feel free to reach out via Twitter, where we are Old Bull TV. Take a moment just to subscribe to the channel while you're here, and while you're doing that, let me introduce today's fantastic panel. I am really excited to have them here today. This is exactly the group of people I'd hope to bring in to talk about this race, and I hope they'll be able to help you get a fuller understanding not only of this frankly hard to forecast election, but to get an edge on the related PredictIt markets. So let's get to it. First on your left there is Paul Butler. He's making his first appearance on PredictIt Live, but he is no stranger to most of our viewers, having been on our sister show and podcast for the Open Model Project earlier this year, discussing this very topic. Paul runs the site ranked.vote, which is the definitive repository for ranked choice vote election data and analysis. Paul, good to see you again. Thanks for coming back and helping us sort out this rather complex primary.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. It's a pleasure.
And if Paul is our redshirt first-timer, then Logan Phillips is our true freshman panelist today. He is an all-around wonky guy, staffer in the Obama White House and Clinton presidential campaign, Columbia University trained elections analyst, and the founder and editor of RaceToTheWH.com, sort of a pandemic passion project he'll be talking to us about today. And in spite of the name, is also very useful for analyzing the race to Gracie Mansion, which is to say this New York City mayoral race. The site just underwent a serious upgrade today, and we're going to get into all that it offers those trying to handicap this election. But first, Paul, for the uninitiated, give us a quick recap, very high-level summary of what ranked choice voting is and why it matters here for folks looking at Tuesday's primary.
Sure. So the gist of it, and we can get into the technicals of tabulation later, but the gist as a voter is that you're going to rank kind of the top 5 candidates that you'd like to see, or at least the top few, and then make some tiebreakers of the candidates who you think will get to the end, if that's your strategy. But essentially, you're providing a ranking of the candidates. When it comes time to pick the winner, those ballots are kind of sorted into bins, sometimes literally, but you can think of this as kind of the way that it works. Sorted into bins based on the first vote. The bin with the least votes in it is then removed. All the votes in that, all the ballots in that bin are reallocated to the second vote on them, and so on down the ballots until you have just 2 bins left, and then whichever bin has the most ballots in it is the winner.
Okay, so it seems simple enough, and the philosophy behind it, I think, is sort of graspable to everyone. They want to be able to get at people's non-first choice preferences as a way to sort of simulate an instant runoff until you get to it's almost like an automated way of doing a caucus, where people that don't candidates that don't have enough support are eliminated, and their supporters then regroup with their second choice, third choice, fourth choice. So you get this kind of an instant runoff until someone gets an outright majority of the support. So before we jump into Logan's site, his analysis and race simulation to get a better sense of how this might actually unfold, because this, of course, is the first time that New York City is doing this in a citywide primary, so no one really knows exactly what to expect. But Logan's work, I think, is going to help us give some shape and context to that. But before we do that, I want to take a look at the increasingly large complex of markets that PredictIt has on this primary. And if we can get a look at just the overall NYC market complex. Here you go. You see more than 10, 11 markets, it looks like, on various races. Not all of these are on the mayoral primary. Some are on city council primaries, and one is Brooklyn president, and one is Manhattan DA. But most of these are on this mayoral primary. So you can play anything from who's going to be the outright winner, or the outright winner of the election. But of course, that's basically the same question: is who will win the Democratic primary. You can try and forecast who's going to be leading in the first round, what the margin is going to be in the first round, what the eventual margin will be after all those various rounds, those iterations of vote reallocation that Paul was walking us through, who's going to be second place, and so on. So we're going to get into all this in sort of specific ways to play these markets under and overvalued opportunities in the brackets within these different markets. But before we do that, let's turn it over to Logan to actually talk to us about what his simulation and his forecast at racetothewh.com does for the New York City primary. And then we'll see how that may start to be able to guide our trading strategy. So Logan, give us a little bit of a summary of what Race to the WH is, how you came about starting it, and sort of what the, what's under the hood. What is it actually showing us here when you run these different simulations?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for having me. Well, Race to the White House basically breaks down the American political landscape, and I run forecasts that project elections. And so it started out as kind of a side project that I did in the Democratic primary for the presidential election for the presidential campaign management class. And I ended up doing better than Nate Silver in Iowa. So I decided to make it a big thing once the pandemic hit and I had a lot of free time and became a small business. And so last cycle, I got 93% of states right in the presidential and Senate election and called Joe Biden's narrow victories in Georgia and Arizona back in June, and ended up a little more accurate on average than Nate Silver in projecting the final margin in each state. And so, it's particularly hard for the New York City mayor's race for all the reasons that you said, right? Because primaries are always hard, but in this race in particular, everything is in flux and you have to figure out ranked choice voting. So I have to project not just what voters want as their first choice, but what by candidate, right? Like they're going to choose once their candidate gets eliminated. And this race has completely changed. Earlier on, it was kind of consistent, likely Andrew Yang or Eric Adams, Kathryn Garcia, Scott Stringer, and Maya Wiley were these dark horses that had an outside shot if everything went right. And then, for both of them, almost everything went right in the last few weeks. Kathryn Garcia got the New York Times endorsement, a ton more coverage, fits well with what the electorate wants. Maya Wiley has consolidated the left as AOC, Warren, and Julian Castro have gone into back her. And now they're both neck and neck, surging like crazy in the last 2 weeks, even as Eric Adams moves ahead. So we have a super tight race. And so, what my forecast is showing is Eric Adams is certainly the front runner, but he doesn't have this race locked up, especially if Wiley and Garcia continue the movement and gains they made the last 2 weeks. Then they have a real shot at an upset.
Interesting. Yeah, that sort of tracks with what we've been seeing in the markets. What we've sort of offered as a high level analysis of this race. In the last few weeks, as we've sort of covered it here and there. I like and I take your overall point there too about Adams kind of not having this locked up. And this is the one area, or one of the areas, that in my mind PredictIt has shifted from. They were clearly way over bullish on Yang, and we were saying for a while, Adams was really kind of overlooked here, and Yang was just coming in with this sort of national name recognition and sort of hit his ceiling very, very early. The market has really had to come to Jesus on that, on the latter part of the Yang being overvalued, and they've now got him basically, having very little chance. Let's say I'm going to try and pull it up again. There's so many different markets here now, but yeah, they've got Yang with only 14 cents, to win the general. He was up over 70 for a while. For a while, he was, by far the favorite to come in both first and second, in fact. But, and I do wonder to the extent to which traders may now be, oversimplifying the race as being the front runners to lose, because again, in such a fractured field, Adams' vote share, his first round support share in most of the polls is only between 20 and 25 cents. And as you put, this has been a hugely dynamic race. Not these support levels have not been stable in these last couple of weeks. This is really when New Yorkers have historically tended to tune into these races, and so having a 20 to 17% polling edge, doesn't mean much if a third of voters are going to make up their mind in the last week. And with Garcia and Wiley ascendant, Yang virtually dead, and Adams kind of maybe he's hit his peak, or maybe the scandals to do with residency and tax and transparency and paperwork and things are starting to eat into that ceiling a little bit. So I would just tend to draw a line under that point that you make about this clearly not being decided. And I think that to some extent, Adams has started to get frothy, even though we've been bullish on Adams throughout these markets' life cycles. I wonder if, in fact, he's at 58 cents to win outright, but I'm just going to see if I can pull up the first place leader market, and he's at 77 cents there. So that's I think getting extremely frothy for the pretty narrow and not particularly stable lead that he seems to have. Paul, what do you think? I mean, especially as it relates to this differential here, 77 cents for Adams to place first in the first round, 58 cents for him to be the outright winner. This is a conversation you and I have had a couple of times in the past, but to what extent can we expect the ranked choice vote, the reallocation, to have a dramatic impact on who will, for instance, be leading in the first round versus who will win the overall primary once all the votes are reallocated?
So my general rule with ranked choice is that most elections are boring. So my prior, leaving aside the fact that it's a New York election, leaving aside what we know about the race a couple weeks out now, the prior would be that this is going to be a boring election like the others, and that the first place candidate is probably 95% likely. This being the race that it is, I actually think that the likelihood of the first round winner not being the final winner is higher. I haven't done the math, but I think that 75-25 is probably roughly, it rings reasonable to me.
And Logan, to get into a little bit of a quantification of this, I know that your platform actually simulates and does all this reallocation on all of the simulation, applies some kind of an uncertainty or distribution around the vote share implied by your weighted polling average, and then steps through all the simulation of reallocating your second, third, fourth, up to fifth choice. What's your simulation telling us? Will give us kind of the headline of the probabilistic forecast that's saying who's going to win, but also what's it saying in terms of how this reallocation will change from the first round to the final decision round.
Yeah, well, Paul, it's kind of funny that you haven't done the math, because it's kind of uncanny how close you were to what my forecast says. I have 76% chance that the person that wins in the first round ends up becoming the mayor, or the Democratic nominee for the mayor. So yeah, 24% of the time, something else is going to happen, at least according to my forecast. And right now, like we were saying, Eric Adams in a strong position, 52% chance of winning for me, followed by Wiley and Garcia, each about at 20%. I also, like a lot of your bettors, think that Yang has really fallen down a lot. Part of it's that his polling, and part of it's also he's really getting hurt in the ranked choice voting process. I think a lot of voters who were considering ranking him have changed their mind in recent weeks.
Interesting. So if we can actually pull up the overall winner who will be elected New York City mayor, because I wanted to zero in on that forecast since you're putting some numbers on it for us here. This is where it deviates a little bit from the market pricing. It's interesting to hear that you and Paul both have a similar sense of what the likelihood is of the overall winner being the first round winner. And that, of course, is fairly similar to what PredictIt is saying. They're saying 70 cents. I think you're saying 75, 76%. But in terms of the overall winner percentage here, I believe, Logan, you said you have Adams at about 52%. So the odds-on favorite, but just barely. And then with Garcia and Wiley both at about 20. So it seems like PredictIt traders here are, having trouble letting go of Yang fully, because it sounds like you would have him in the single digits. And what has seemed to be just a running theme throughout the life of this market is that Wiley seems underpriced. We've said that since before there was really any polling to speak of here. And again, this goes back to some analysis on the Open Model Project that Peter Herford had done, showing that she really, really polls well, especially with people who have gotten to know her, that she came in with relatively very low name recognition, but among those who did have name recognition, she was head of the pack. And so as long as she, had enough stamina in her campaign and could get those public matching funds, which she was on pace to and eventually did do, then she would presumably get her message out to enough of the people that enough people would have the name recognition, and that she would have essentially a very much higher ceiling than some of her competitors here. And she's running now in a lot of these polls neck and neck for number 2, just a couple points behind Adam. So it does seem to me strange that she's trading at such a discount to Garcia, for instance. She's trading at about half of Garcia's price, 13 versus 23 cents, and about even with Yang. So either Paul or Logan, how do you explain that apparent disparity? Is it, again, just kind of a leftover effect from, it doesn't seem possible that Yang could be that low given he was trading over 70, so that's giving him a boost? Or, the fact that Garcia surged before Wiley, even though Wiley's now been consolidating some of that progressive support with a number of high profile endorsements, AOC perhaps chief among them. Is there any other explanation here, or is there something that we're missing? Because it sounds like, from what Logan's saying, his simulation suggests, sort of resonates with my sort of, I guess, more qualitative, just finger in the wind sense of how this race is shaping up going into the final rounds.
I think it's because Wiley has just surged at the speed of light, and it takes a long time sometimes for the conventional wisdom to catch up. And that's actually why I'm so high on Wiley. I think she's popped about 7 or 8% in the course of a week, and she's doing a lot better as you go down the ballot too than she was before. And so polling is always a snapshot in time of what voters were thinking last week. So it's entirely possible that Wiley's in an even better position at this point. It's also possible she slipped, and now that she's going to get a little more negative coverage, she won't be able to continue to rise. We just don't know. But I think when in doubt, the candidate that is rising like crazy has a higher chance of an upset than they normally would. So I would definitely think that Wiley's a good investment at this point.
Yeah, I think if I had to explain what the market is pricing in, which is always a dangerous exercise to begin with, my hunch would be that there's sort of this idea that the undeciders will break towards name recognition. So maybe that Yang has the advantage there. But I kind of agree. I think it seems like his time has passed.
Let's shift gears a little bit. I want to go to a little quirk in one of the kind of prop bets on this race that's available on PredictIt, and that's on the number of rounds of reallocation that it will take to get to a winner. So, Paul, appreciate the synopsis you did for us at the outset of how this works, where effectively the last place candidate is stripped and their votes are reallocated to the remaining candidates according to voter preferences. And so, of course, you start with this field. There are 13 balloted candidates. And if we can bring up this market on the number of RCV rounds that it'll take to get to a winner, you'll see that they have brackets ranging from 5 or fewer all the way up to 14 rounds. So there's been some confusion, and I hope we are able to shed some light on how this is all going to work and how people should be thinking about these brackets, because at first we took a stab at it when this was launched a few days ago now as well, and realized that there are a number of complexities here that you really need to be able to get your arms around. But as sort of a base case in terms of thinking about this, so again, 13 candidates. If you eliminate one for every round, then you would seem to have up to 12 rounds to get down to one overall winner. But it's not quite as simple as that. Paul, can you step through a couple of the complicating factors that make this not simply a case of it being somewhere between 1 and 12?
Sure. So when you're actually doing this tabulation in practice, one of the things that comes up is that you can, in some of these rounds, you get to a point where you can eliminate multiple candidates in that round. And the way to kind of think about that is if you imagine kind of stacking like a ranked bar chart from to least number of votes on a particular round. If you ever get to a situation where you could stack a number of the bars from the right and they still don't, even when you stack them, they don't reach the next leftmost bar, in other words, the candidate who has the least amount of votes, then you can just eliminate all of those at once, because you know that even if you took all of those all the votes that belong to all of those candidates and kind of put them in one bucket, you still wouldn't have enough votes in that bucket to not be eliminated in the subsequent round anyway. So that's called batch elimination. Some jurisdictions do it, some don't. And part of the confusion here has been that New York statutorily is obligated to do this, but hasn't in the 3 past special elections that used ranked vote. So there was one election, I believe in February, 2 in March, that were not tabulated with batch elimination. Then in just a month ago in May, the tabulation software was approved. So these previous ranked elections were actually done by hand, physically moving ballots between bins. But now there's fortunately software that's been approved for the mayoral election, which will hopefully allow some people to go to bed a lot earlier than they did in these ranked elections. And so the tabulator that's been approved is what's called the universal ranked choice tabulator. It's an open source tabulator, so you can actually go and look at the code. So I did, and made sure that the code supports this batch elimination. So it actually does, but you have to turn it on. It's not the default. But every indication that I have is that the Board of Elections is going to do the right thing and do batch elimination for the tabulated records here. There's an approval process to get the software approved. I can only assume that part of that process was testing that the software could do tabulation according to the statute. So, to me, that implies that they're going to turn that switch on and do batch elimination.
Right. No, that very good explanation. Appreciate that of how this batch elimination works. It's a way to sort of save rounds, I guess, when mathematically the bottom several are mathematically eliminated. In other words, if you got 10 candidates and you stack number 7 through 10 and together they're not as tall as number 6, then you can just eliminate number 7 through 10 as a batch. So if they do it that way, which again, the amended city charter requires them to do it that way, if they do it and report it that way, then you would have a maximum number of rounds somewhere less than the 12 we talked about, which you'd get if you just systematically knocked one of the 13 off in each round. So the couple tweaks that could impact this is, of course, you could have write-ins and number of write-ins eliminated in the first round. So that could bring you up to a maximum of 13 if there were no batch eliminations other than the write-in batch. PredictIt also then added after launch a bracket of 14, which kind of had folks, including myself, scratching our heads saying, well, how could you get to 14 even if you have all the write-ins? But Paul, you brought up the point just before we went on the air that theoretically you could have a write-in get so many votes that he couldn't be batch eliminated with all the others. So he would effectively be the same as a balloted candidate for purposes of counting the number of rounds of reallocation. So theoretically, you could have 14 or even more if you had a number of really compelling write-in candidates, but assuming that we won't, which I think is a decent assumption, then really that max would still be 13, which would include the write-in batch. But a lot of it does ultimately come down to this situation of whether they do report them according to the way that the charter requires that they count them. Now, as you mentioned, Paul, in the 3 city council specials that have been conducted under this new system, they have not reported them according to the batch elimination process. But importantly, as you pointed out, that those were all before this new software that does that automated reallocation tabulation was certified and implemented. So we would hope, it's probably a decent assumption, that they now will, for this kind of main event, report it according to the way that the charter says they have to and the way that the now fully audited, tested software does enable. But crucially, and in response to us kind of us being the trader universe in general, wondering aloud about how this would come down, PredictIt actually put out a supplemental comment in the rules on this market just today, just within the last hour or so, saying, For purposes of resolution of this market, there you see it on screen, PredictIt will defer to the vote numbers, elimination decisions, and round calculations contained within the certified election results released by the New York City Board of Elections. So it's possible, it's just ultimately going to come down to how the BOE decides to actually put out the paperwork, that even if computationally on the night of the election or the day following the election, they do this batch elimination to determine the winner and the ultimate final round vote totals, it's possible for presentation purposes for the certified election results, they could put out something that shows, every theoretical interim, non-batch round. And that, I don't know how much more knowable that will be before election day. We could and maybe should spend a little time on the phone hounding the BOE folks to see if they, can identify more specifically the formatting of how the certified election results will look, but it does sound as though there's less risk of that happening now, Paul, for the reasons that you laid out. The fact that we do now have the software in place that they didn't have previously, and that presumably is why they did it in a more manual way last time. Logan, what are your thoughts on this and the degree to which people should be nervous about a technicality befouling an otherwise potentially very good forecast?
Yeah, well, this changes the whole ballgame because the way I run it is I'm going one by one, kind of as if it was hand ballot in terms of my simulation. And so along those lines, over 90% of the time, I found it took all 12 rounds to be able to eliminate enough candidates to get someone over 50%. But because, I haven't done that type of process, so I can't give too much more value than that.
Right. Yeah, I guess the other way to look at this too is that if you just want to speculate on the human decision, does the BOE ultimately put out the kind of the pro forma round by round without batch eliminations? If they were to do that, then effectively we're almost guaranteed 13, Paul. Is that right? Is that the way to think about this?
Yeah, I think because it's such a tight race at the top, the first, the main contenders, it's unlikely, as Logan mentioned, that you get to a point where you have a candidate pass 50% before that last round.
Right. I guess the other possibility would be someone comes in with a clean, outright majority in the first round. But it certainly seems from the polling, unless 3 candidates die in the next 6 days, that doesn't seem like it's a super likely outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah. The race is definitely consolidating in the top 4, and it's possible that you have that Adams just continues to surge, Wiley's lead is temporary, whatever, but it's definitely not likely.
So let's turn the conversation to tonight, where we have another debate. I believe this is the last official debate. Just last week, they had their last unofficial debate. This is the one that Adams, in the immediate wake of the Politico story about his residency and some tax issues, he bowed out of the debate and then bowed back in sort of last minute. I watched that one. It was actually the first debate of this cycle that I'd watched all the way through for this race. As expected, everyone beat up on Adams together. I think you probably expect more of the same tonight. It's a smaller crowd in tonight's a smaller crowd of candidates in tonight's debate, but I think you can reasonably expect Yang and Wiley to sort of gang up on him. But unless I missed it, there didn't seem to be, either from that debate or from the Politico scandals, if you want to call them that, didn't really seem to land much of a glove on Adams, or at least it didn't really show up in the polling metrics. Or were you guys looking at on a more granular basis? Does it look like he does have reason to worry, or that the kind of coordinated attacks on him at the debates might be bearing some fruit? Or is this just, an entertaining bit of theater that's not likely to change the shape of the race 6 days out?
Yeah, Flip, I think that candidates are really hitting the wrong point here. Adams' favorabilities are still extremely high. And I think it's a real mistake to attack a candidate's biggest strength with 2 weeks left. From the very beginning, his profile, which he's done a great job of establishing, is that New York City is in his blood. He's a lifelong New Yorker. And this whole scandal is way too confusing for voters to be able to get, right? Because you want your message to be as simple as possible so that everyone can understand it. And for someone that's following the race, it's hard for me to see what the big deal is on this issue, right? If he's staying with his girlfriend in New Jersey too much or sleeping in his office, is that really the reason someone shouldn't be mayor? I think for people that don't like Adams, that's a good reason, but they already have others that are there. The much stronger attack I think they should be making is that he used to be a Republican. And he hasn't had a good explanation to explain what happened in the early 2000s that caused him to change. He might have a good answer when he's pressed this time around because he's probably ready for a lot of attacks. But if he doesn't, that could take some blood because it could suggest he's more conservative than he suggests. And given that he's the most moderate top contending candidate, there's some room to grow there, especially for someone like Wiley that's trying to win over some of the progressive support from Adams, especially of the African-American community.
Yeah, Paul, on this debate and specifically on the Wiley front, she was the one who, more so than Adams, if anyone, last week, sort of put their foot in their mouth during the debate, and it was in one of those attack lines on Adams, in the sense that, again, she's kind of locked up that more progressive wing, and I think she was sort of looking to highlight that wedge issue between them. Adams being retired New York Police Department, Wiley kind of being the other end of that spectrum. For an increasingly security conscious electorate in New York City, she was the one who would not explicitly state that she would not disarm police. Not just defund, but disarm police in New York. The next day, she was forced her campaign to put out a statement saying, "Absolutely, I won't disarm the police." But in the heat of the moment, when asked in the debate, she wouldn't commit not to disarm police officers. So does that fault line between the progressive wing supporting Wiley and the perhaps more moderate bloc behind Adams, does this sort of take that attack line away from Wiley? Can we expect her to be a little more gun shy about really wearing those progressive colors loud and proud tonight, or should we expect to see her come at him hard? It's the last few days. There's really there's nowhere to go after this. So what would you expect to see her strategy be tonight, and could it move the needle on this late date, already 5 days into early voting?
I can only speculate so much on what people's strategies will be as far as the kind of lines of attack. But one of the things I'm really interested in watching is to what extent, as we reach the final stretch, some of these candidates start to kind of, I don't know about if you call it form alliances, but sort of have these sort of trying to make inroads with each other's candidates or each other's electorate to be kind of the number 2, number 3 ranking on those ballots. So I'm interested in seeing whether that kind of takes shape in the debates and whether things are a bit less, especially outside of Adams, whether things are a little bit less contentious between the candidates as they try to curry favor from their electorates.
Well, gentlemen, let's get back to a little bit of data that we do have thus far. New York is putting out early voting data, albeit not much. They're showing us kind of the top level borough by borough early voting check-ins each day. The main headline from this is that very few people, it seems to me, are voting early. Anyway, I think the best performing boroughs, Manhattan, they're at about 1.8%, with the others much closer to 1%. But does this or any of the other data that you've seen eking out from the early returns tell you anything useful about what we can expect here? Overall turnout levels, or outperformance or underperformance by borough or by candidate?
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in New York you need an excuse to early vote. Is that right?
No, unless, I'm on Long Island, which is New York, of course, though not New York City, but I voted excuse-free out here, and it's been similar. Check-in data out here has been pretty disappointing, between 1% and 2%. So no, I think this is just apathy or procrastination.
Okay.
Yeah, we just don't know yet, right? Like, it could mean it's not a great sign for turnout, but I don't think we can read too much to it, because New York, despite being the most progressive states, had some of the least amount of early voting in the country until very recently. So this has been the first mayor primary they've had that chance. I don't think it was even available, and correct me if I'm wrong, last Democratic primary for 2020. I think it started in the general election. So this is not a state that has, or a city that has a habit of early voting yet. And that might change over time, but I think you're still going to see a much bigger election day turnout.
And then on election day, speaking of this data, what sources would you folks would you recommend folks be tuned into? And are there any kind of early key bellwethers, either, certain boroughs, certain demographics in exit polling, if it's available? What would you kind of be looking at as those early indicators that things are going to unfold basically as we expected, or that there could be a surprise in the works?
From what I've been reading, it seems like there may be more delays this year because of ranked choice, where there's hesitancy to put out preliminary results if it could result in kind of the order of rounds flipping, or change who's eliminated in the first round. So the indications that I've seen, and I can't remember the source of this, so take it as it is, but was that it may be maybe days or a week before there's sort of preliminary first round results.
Oh boy, that's atrocious. Logan, is that your understanding as well?
Yeah, New York is one of the slowest states in the country when it comes to voting. So thank God it's not a ranked choice voting like Pennsylvania, where it'd be a competitive state in the general, where we might have to wait a few weeks before they know who's running.
Right.
I would say keep an eye on if you can find good information and it's released on what boroughs people are voting for. It looks like at this point that Adams is leading in 4 of the boroughs. The exception is Manhattan, where he is not doing well. So it's kind of interesting. That's where a lot of the early voting is. That's a great place for Garcia and a good place for Wiley.
Yeah, that is interesting, given that the outperformance in Manhattan, that was kind of the one outlier among the 5. Although also you may have a party enrollment differential there as well, because those early voting check-ins are not party specific, and you do have contested primaries on the Republican side as well. So that's not all exactly apples to apples, but possibly something to keep an eye on if the Adams strongholds are not turning out as eagerly. We actually have a question in the chat here from Kevin Lyden. Says, do you think Garcia and Wiley, this goes back to what you all were talking about a few minutes ago, could announce a voting pact? And if so, who would most likely benefit? And even if they are, I'll add this myself editorially, if they don't announce it, but if they're kind of messaging privately to their supporters that, hey, you might want to think about, second place ranking Wiley or Garcia, something like that likely to emerge unofficially or otherwise, and who would it benefit?
It would do a ton to help both of them. I think it would be, it's really funny you mentioned that, Kevin. I never thought about that until it came up in the conversation, and it just seems like a really good strategy. But part of it also might come down to their personal preference. If they don't want Adams to be mayor, maybe they do, right? Because it could have a real impact on that as well. You're getting really competitive races for all 3 when you get to the final round in terms of who people are ranking between. If Adams is out and Wiley and Garcia, or if Wiley is out and Adams and sorry, Garcia's out and Adams and Wiley. And so that can make a huge swing if they're closely aligned with each other. Also, frankly, though, they're going to have an alliance almost guaranteed in the next week, not formally, but in terms of attacking Adams, right? Because this guy is very much in the way. And they don't have time to worry about the other candidates. They have to dig away some of his support, and particularly convince voters that are not sold on Adams not to rank him before themselves.
Yeah, that might be something to watch out for in the debate tonight, too, to see if Garcia and Wiley are treating each other, especially with kid gloves. They may be kind of teeing something like that up. What do you think, Paul? Is that something you've seen in other races? You obviously pay a lot of attention to different municipal ranked choice votes. Do you see these sort of informal or even formal alliances between, kind of the 2 and 3, number 2 and 3 candidates that feel like together they could knock off the front runner?
Yeah, I think generally it kind of manifests as less cutthroat campaigns, especially when you're dealing with candidates who are kind of not the number 1, and it's a little easier to gang up on the number 1 because you expect them to kind of make it to the last rank anyway. So you don't care as much that their voters rank you, even if their voters like you number 2. Those votes are no good to you, but anybody who you think could be ahead of you in the rankings, in terms of like eliminated ahead of you in the rankings, is worth soliciting their vote. And so you do see some of that. Yeah.
Interesting stuff, guys. Well, let's take one more look at the overall board here, the NYC market complex. I'm bringing it up on my own device as it hopefully comes up on your screen there in a sec. And just want you gentlemen to sort of survey the landscape here. If you had to pick something to plunk down $850 on We looked at a couple of the prices in the overall markets here, but anything strike you as being just egregiously over or underpriced? Could even be on one of the undercard races here on Brooklyn President or City Council, but and a couple of these have just hit the board, so they don't have live pricing yet. But other markets where you want to dig a little deeper, the traders might want to be kind of scratching the surface outside of those marquee 2 or 3 markets.
So I think on the sorry, go ahead, Logan.
No, please.
I was going to say on the RCV round board, I think that 16 or 13 is already down a couple cents to 16 in the last hour or so, but I think that you can buy no on that for 85 cents, and I think that's a buy. And if you can get any of 14 or more for, frankly, any price up to 99 cents, I think that it takes such an unlikely turn of events to get to 14 or more, because you kind of need to have a write-in candidate get their own round for that train of events to happen. And you probably also need the Board of Elections to not batch eliminate. And that's the other thing where I think that's what's being priced into this, is the idea that the Board of Elections may not batch eliminate. But I think the market's overpricing that, even though it is a possibility. They haven't batch eliminated before. But again, it's this new software, and it's a more high-profile race.
So you think that 16 is, if anything, overestimating the odds that we see the results come in without the batch elimination reflected?
Yeah, I think it's unlikely. It's a possibility, and if anybody has little faith in the BOE to kind of do things right the first time around, it's me. So like I'm normally skeptical of. There was a fiasco last year with when they were doing mail-in voting for the first time, and how they handled that. But I think they'll get this one right. It's easy enough as it's just flipping a switch on the software, and to do it by the book. And I think they'll do that.
I'm hearing echoes of Iowa caucus. Sometimes it goes south.
Ken, would you be on the other side of that trade? Logan, do you like the 13 bracket it's actually ticked down now to 15? Is that appealing enough for you to speculate on the board doing things manually?
I think so. I'll be honest, on the batch part, this is just a real weakness for me, and I need to get a stronger understanding. So I don't want to give people bad advice on the area of all the all your choices that I could predict. I feel like I'm least capable in this one. The one I would really focus on personally is there's 2 of them. Who has the lead after the first round? I think Adams is way too high at 76%. I think it should be closer to 55% or so. Because again, remember we're talking about
up to 78%. It's really getting kind of nuts. I'm not sure how people see an almost 8 in 10 chance with that, fairly small polling lead and 1 or 2 ascendant runners up biting at his heels. So yeah, I'm with you on that one.
Yeah. I mean, if Wiley or Garcia has another great week like this, then they're right behind them, and good turnout can make the difference. I'd certainly rank him, say he's the most likely without question. But the other one I think is way too high. I'd vote no. I'd choose no on is Kathryn Garcia for second choice. Last time I checked, going in here was about 40% chance. I have her about 25% chance to be in second place. A, she has a good shot at winning. B, like both Eric Adams, Maya Wiley, and Andrew Yang could easily end up in second place. I think it should be a lot more evenly divided.
Yeah. So do you think people are sort of equating this market to who is sort of second most likely to come in first rather than who is most likely to come in second?
Exactly.
So it's interesting in your simulation, you said, tell us again, was it 20%, 25% of the time she comes in second in your simulations?
Yeah. So I can say for all of them, I have Garcia. Garcia coming in 25% of the time in second. I actually have Wiley as the most likely to be in second, right? Because I have Garcia as equally likely as Wiley to win because she does so well in that final round of winning, in particular both Maya Wiley and Andrew Yang's voters with their second choice support. But because Wiley is rising so fast in the polls, I give her a boost in momentum because there's a real shot she's continued to rise. So she's more likely to reach that final round. Does that make sense?
I think so. I'm sure people watching will be able to track it better, but that's why we keep it on replay, available on the archive as well. But no, seriously, that's very useful information. And again, it's in the kind of not quite the marquee market here too. So it's possible this is where you tend to get a somewhat more opportunity for possible mispricings. And I don't know if it's true that traders are misinterpreting, not that they're not understanding what the rules say, but that they're sort of treating this as a proxy for who's second most likely to come in first rather than who's most likely to come in second. For the latter, which of course is what this is actually about, you need to think about it in that RCV methodology, which is exactly what your simulation does. So yeah, if we trust the output of that, it would suggest that Garcia is by a fair margin overpriced in this market, and possibly Adams, Wiley, and Yang a bit underpriced. So some hopefully useful, actionable trading ideas for folks to follow along with here. Obviously, you want to keep an eye on that debate tonight. You want to keep an eye out for any additional polling. Do either of you happen to know the remaining polling schedule? Can we expect new surveys to be coming out in these final few days?
I definitely think you're going to see some serious polling coming out in the next few days. I don't have the specific pollsters, but they've been waiting till the end.
Right.
And they're no longer gun shy. There's no reason not to do another one because they don't want to. It's embarrassing if you have a poll in a race that's so in flux that your last poll is just wildly off because you didn't take the time to do a second. You'll see Marist. I think you'll see Emerson come out with another one and some other big guys too.
Excellent. Well, yeah, absolutely. Keep an eye on that. All this information can quickly go by the wayside if we see someone suddenly moving in one direction or another. And of course, you could have some huge flap tonight at the debate. If nothing else, it should be entertaining. Last time we had what we called the dating game debate. They were asking, all kinds of, supposedly humanizing questions, and the lightning round has just turned into something a bit more embarrassing. And I think that's what we were going for. But it should be a good television, if not cringeworthy television tonight, and it could actually impact these prices. So keep an eye on that. I believe it's from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern tonight. Keep an eye on those late breaking polls. Keep an eye on this large and growing complex of markets at PredictIt, and follow these two gentlemen's sites. If you don't already have them open in tabs right now, you want to go to them and bookmark them. Keep them handy for this race and for these markets. Again, for Paul, it is ranked.vote. And for Logan, it's Race to the White House. This is race to the WH.com. Did I get both of those right, guys?
Got it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Paul. Thank you, Logan. Hope to have you guys back soon. Maybe we'll even, hopefully we're not waiting for days and weeks for these results. But if we are, and there's still potential profits to be made, maybe we can take a look at this after the polls close next Tuesday, or the days, or God forbid, weeks thereafter. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all of you viewers for being with us today. We'll be back again at 1 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. New traders, again, don't forget to claim that $25 deposit match at predictit.org/promo/oldbull25. Follow us on Twitter at oldbulltv. Let us know your questions and requests for future market coverage. Thank you for watching. Happy trading, and we will see you next time.